Ghost hunting gone scary. My profile tells of the history of my house. My cousin Mary and I love seeing ghosts every time she spends the night at my house, so we go ghost hunting at about 2 or 3 in the morning. Most of the time, we see our granny walking around, we hear someone say boo, or we hear a loud bang. Well, one night we did it. I think the ghost got a little bit more upset with us. It was about 2:30 or so at night. We grabbed my lantern and turned out all the lights. At first, there was nothing big going on. We walked around but saw nothing. We decided to sit on the couch in my living room and talk for a little bit. Then, by our window, we saw a cloudy white figure walk in from the window and past the wall. We were a little bit freaked out, but not too bad. Then, we sat for a little while longer. We had all the lights completely off and no one else was down there with us. I was just sitting there for a little bit, and then all of a sudden the living room light went on and then went off. I looked over and Mary was still right beside me, and no one else was with us as I stated before. We heard noises and everything, so I decided to tell the ghost or ghost to give us a sign that it was there with us. "Pull Mary's hair or clothes or something," I told it. Nothing happened. We decided to check the computer for a second because we just got bored sitting there. We turned on the computer room light and we were on it for about 5 minutes. We started again. I tried to turn on the lantern, but it would not go on. My dad already put new batteries in it before, and they were just bought batteries. It was turned on all the way, but it would still not turn on. "Turn on," I said somewhat quietly. The lantern then turned on. Mary was starting to get a little bit freaked out. I did not really think of it. "That was the sign," Mary told me. We went into the living room again and sat down. I wanted to find out if the ghosts were really with us. I turned it off. "Is there anyone with us? If there is anyone with us, then when I turn this lantern back on, make sure it stays off," I said with confidence. Sure enough, the lantern stayed off. We tried it a few more times again, and it still would not stay on. It was about 3:15 or 3:30 a.m., so we decided to call it a night. I went to turn the light back on, but then the room started getting very cold. I sat back down by Mary. I made Mary come with me to turn the lights on. Then the stove door opened and then banged shut by itself with no one down there but us. We were sure that ghost did not want us to stop. "I'm sorry, ghosts," we told it. "Please don't be mad. We just do not feel like ghost hunting anymore tonight. We've been at it for almost an hour." After we said that, I turned the lights back on and nothing else happened for the rest of the night. My first ghost hunt. I took part in my first ghost hunt for Halloween last year. I will try to recite my experience as best as I can, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask. The location was at a hotel and bar that has a reputation for being quite active. The building still trades as a hotel, so I'll leave it unnamed. Suffice to say, we had permission from the owners before going ahead. I am a confirmed believer, but have never sought to seek out the paranormal in any way, so approached the event apprehensively but still open-minded. The event was a real eye-opener, and the story I would like to tell occurred during one of the vigils we held during the night. I will start with a quick layout of the area. Beneath the hotel runs a series of tunnels and rooms which make up the cellar. At the far end of the cellar is a narrow tunnel which is used as the barrel run for the bar. We were told that ordinarily this room would be stocked with beer barrels, but on this night it was empty. It was in here where we decided to hold our vigil. The first thing we noticed on entering the barrel run was the cold temperature compared to the rest of the cellar. This could be put down to the time of the year and the fact the run has a metal door that could be opened to drop barrels down, which would allow cold air in. The area also had a very strange atmosphere, which it hadn't had when we visited earlier in the night. Turning our torches off, we weren't in total darkness due to moonlight shining through the barrel drop doors and an emergency exit light. We created an energy circle and called out for any presence to make itself known. We were rewarded with a soft tapping at the end of the corridor away from the barrel drop. We ruled out pipes and no visible pipes ran through this part of the cellar, and the main pipe run was at the opposite end of the cellar. We had explored that area earlier in the night, and it is behind a heavy wooden door, which blocks out most of the noise. We had an interesting experience there, which saw a member of the group run out at high speed. Anyways, back to the tapping. We called out again for the tapping to be repeated, and it was, still faint and in the same location. One of the group pointed out a strange shadow that had appeared in the open doorway, which joined the barrel run to the rest of the cellar. This was at the same end of the tunnel the tapping had been coming from. We all turned, and every member of the group agreed that they could see a shadowy figure at the end of the corridor. From where I stood, the shape of a body, shoulders and head could be seen clearly. We were the only group in the basement at this time, but we shouted out to see if it was someone who had lost their group and was lost. In turn, we got no reply, but the shadow appeared to move in our direction, coming towards us. We called out again, encouraging the figure to approach us. It didn't, but did stay in the same position before disappearing. I mean, it didn't fade or walk away. It was a case of there 1 minute, gone the next. We moved out of the main barrel run into a side room of the barrel run that was used as storage for old bar furniture. The doorway we used was the only entrance. Away from the two sources of light we'd had before, this room was pitch black with the torches off. The moment we walked into the room, the atmosphere became very heavy and to me felt very hostile. Other members of the group later confirmed that they felt unwelcome in the storage room. We created a circle around an old table and called up for anyone present to make themselves known again. One of the group facing towards the back of the room said they could see red lights flashing. Great, that's the way my back was facing. Calling out again, we asked if the feeling we had was that this was a male spirit with us, could do anything else. The sudden loud noise of wood scraping across stone caused a few screams and numerous torches to be switched on. The table we had circled had visibly turned slightly. All members of the group denied accidentally touching the table, so we turned our lights off and asked if he could do it again. The feeling we got was the entity was a male and the same person we had seen as the shadow earlier before. We waited, and apart from red lights flashing at the back of the room, only seen by the same person as earlier, nothing happened. So we asked, "If you want us to go, do something to show us and we will leave." This was quickly followed by the unquestionable sound of a coin bouncing and settling on the floor behind me. We quickly turned our torches back on and I went to investigate. The only thing I found that could have explained the noise was a 10-pence coin. This could have been here before we had entered, but it was a very distinct noise. Taking that as our cue, we left the room and ended our vigil. The AM Erzberg Asylum. This story is gonna be a little bit different than my other ones. Usually I tell a little history of the area and then tell my story of my experiences. This time I will tell you my experiences first, because I did not fully know the history of this place before before I experienced my encounter with the spirit or spirits of the asylum. As a very young child in grade school, I joined Cubs, the younger version of Scouts. As a Cub Scout, we would often go camping or have sleepovers at public buildings. This particular time, we stayed at the old AM Erzberg Asylum. At the time, we were told it was an old orphanage, which is also true. The building has been many things over the years. It has been part of the Fort Malden buildings for many, many years. It was properly known as the Fort Malden Lunatic Asylum. So we stayed there the night and all fell asleep on the woods on the main level. The building resembles a very large colonial house of the pioneer times. It is a 2.5-story brick house with old wooden floors, many wooden windows, and a steep old grand staircase. The house itself is broken up into many rooms. As an old house, it seemed harmless. So there were 20 of us Cub Scouts, with a few leaders staying over the night. As a young boy, I did not have many nightmares. I guess I was a happy kid. But this particular night I did. The night was not a good sleeping night. The house was filled with strange noises, creaks, and clunks. I guess this is typical of an old house, but the sound of running footsteps upstairs seemed to bother all of us, even the leaders. Several boys had trouble sleeping, and I can remember a few of them saying that boys were out of bed and running around. The leaders would do a head count with a flashlight, and all would be accounted for. I can remember it wasn't until very early in the morning that I actually got to fall asleep. Between the noises and the leaders getting up to check the reports of kids out of bed, sleep finally came. But so did a disturbing nightmare. I dreamt that the house was full of kids that were wandering around confused, angry, and crying. They would walk around as if trapped and stop to look at us, the Cubs, sleeping. Many of them had bleeding eyes, vicious bruises on the sides of their heads, or black tongues. It was a really creepy dream. The next day I slept all day once I got home. The visions of the kids in the asylum stayed with me for a few days, and then I eventually forgot about it. Many years passed, and I was now in high school. This is when I learned that the building was once an asylum. I wanted to check it out, but the building was closed to the public and only open to tours on special occasions. I did not dwell on it since there were many other things to investigate in the area. Well, many more years passed, and I eventually got a job, a wife, and kids. 15 years passed, and I found myself back in Cub Scouts as a volunteer leader. My son was now a Cub, and like the good old days, we did a lot of sleepovers. I was excited to hear that we were sleeping over at the fort. I thought the kids would love sleeping in the army barracks, and the whole trip would be so great. Little did I know that we were not sleeping in the barracks. We were indeed sleeping in the asylum. This was mildly disturbing, actually quite the mind grinder. Instantly, a warning flag popped up in the back of my head, but the years had placed a thick layer of cobwebs between my memories and my mind. I had forgotten the impact of the whole experience I had as a youth. The minute I walked into the building, it all came back to me. The place was set out of time. It seemed time had not passed in here, and it was identical to what I was when I was a kid. Knowing more about the building this time, I was a bit freaky by the still air and the feeling of a presence, sensing that I had returned. Being an adult, I quickly swept away those thoughts and focused on the time at hand. So, I had returned to the asylum. Now I was the leader, and we had about 12 kids sleeping on the floor. Of course, the kids did not sleep. They heard the noises and were scared. Well, the running footsteps were back, and other leaders started to comment on them. We did a head count, and all the kids were in their sleeping bags. Some of the kids said they saw other kids out of bed and running around in the halls, so as leaders, we took turns checking on the kids throughout the night. I have to admit, I was really unnerved when I found myself walking through the asylum halls and rooms at night with a little pocket flashlight. With every single turn that I took, I half believed I would see a horrified ghost child, but I did not see anything. Thank God, because my wife would have left me if I returned home without the kid. I did manage enough courage to go upstairs to seek out the source of the footsteps. The second floor had several small rooms, with the dim moonlight flooding into each of them, casting shadows across the floors. The rooms were mostly empty, but all had a few items in them, a single chair or table. They all had old wooden floors that showed the markings where a table once was, or the legs of a bed. The second floor was eerily still. Actually, that's when I noticed that the running footsteps had stopped. I had a very cold chill and the strong feeling that I was the focus of some kind of attention, so I backed out slowly and returned to downstairs. The other leaders asked me what I saw. I told them the truth. Nothing. But none of them were willing to go upstairs on their turns to patrol the area. Needless to say, it was a long night, and I did fall asleep early in the morning, and I did again have the nightmares of the wandering kids with bleeding eyes and black tongues. When I awoke in the morning, the daylight made the building feel peaceful. I quickly swept away the nightmares as a lingering fear from the nightmare I had as a kid. I actually felt silly that I'd gotten all worked up about it. Well, the Cub Scouts were in rough shape from the sleepless night, and the kids were all very groggy. Breakfast was being served outside at a picnic table. The conversation around the table was, of course, the creepy noises. I was barely paying attention to the kids' conversations when I overheard one of the Cubs complain about dreaming about kids with bleeding eyes. More kids talked about having the same dreams. Not all the kids, but 5 or 6, about half of the group. Even one of the leaders said he dreamed of the zombie-like kids, so this set my freak level quite high, and I was very glad once the day was over and the parents were picking up their kids. Of course, I was one of the last leaders to leave, and on the way out, I stopped and had a brief conversation with a groundskeeper. I actually did not know who he was or why he was there. He just appeared and started talking to us about the asylum. He asked if I had stayed in there overnight. I said yes. He said, "I never sleep in there." Of course, I asked why. He said, "Too many bad spirits. I hear them running around sometimes when I'm here late in the afternoon." So I asked him, "Do you believe it is haunted?" He told me, yes. He told me he was about 80 years old. He said his great aunt was committed to this asylum as a child, and that is what brought his family to AM Erzberg. He said when she came out of that place, she was never the same. His father, the aunt's brother, said she was like a zombie, and often cried when she looked at the place, being that they moved only a few houses away across the street. He also told me that this asylum was one of the first to use shock therapy and lobotomies in Canada. He said the doctor was a forerunner of science and would perfect his practice on new patients. The doctor talked his grandparents into moving to AM Erzberg to help their daughter with the promise of a cure through new science. The conversation continued as my awe in his words deepened with every syllable. He continued. He said that the whole asylum had shut down only about 10 years of use because the town was so upset over the treatment of the troubled kids that they chased the doctor out of town. The asylum was later converted into an orphanage and eventually surrendered to the town. Well, needless to say, the information from this nameless old man left me speechless and very troubled. A couple more years passed, and I had forgotten again of the disturbing memories of the asylum. It was movie night, and I was watching Sucker Punch. The scene came up where they punched a steel spike into the brain of people through their eye socket. That's when I realized that is what a lobotomy was, and finally that is when it all came together for me. The kids with the bloody eyes were the victims of a lobotomy. The ruses on the heads were the shock therapy. The black tongues, well, I still don't know. But it all became a lot more real to me once it all added up. So I did some research. The asylum operated in the mid-1800s for only a decade. There were about 240 patients there at one time. They were worked as free labor force. The patients ranged in age from 13 to 55, even mix of males and females. They use hydrotherapy, lobotomy, shock therapy, and drug therapy to treat all kinds of mental illnesses. In my research, I will have to say not much factual data is actually out there, but I was surprised to find conditions that they considered treatable mental illnesses, especially in women. Many women that were locked up as patients were people that were perfectly sane and normal. Examples are women who had gotten pregnant before marriage or overly active, irregular menstrual conditions, women that were attracted to other women, people who had medical problems like fainting or seizures, talking disorders or twitches and tics. Many people who were in prison for debts or crimes were able to get an insanity plea so they could be treated and possibly released. Apparently, there's a list out there for all the inmates and their dispositions, released or deceased, and there's very few that make the released list. I find this period of history the most disturbing, as the instruments were very sanitary and wholesome appearing in intent, but the shady basements and the reality was quite different in a horror film sort of way.